get through today. So I would just like to welcome everybody to this national webinar presenting the project Opening the Gates to Hemp Grazing Livestock in Australia. My name's Bronwyn Blake. I'm the project lead and I work at the Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to the land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. Okay, so today is the first time that results from this project are being communicated publicly. We had 150 people register for today from all states in Australia and a couple from overseas. I know we've got one person from the USA here. We have quite a broad spectrum in our audience from a lot of government officials and representatives of the hemp and livestock industry. About 150 people have registered and so far 70 people have logged in. So hopefully we get a few more coming along today. We will be recording this presentation and I've got all of your email addresses so we can send it out to you afterwards. And you also have my email address and you can forward questions to me after the event. We will be having a Q&A session at the end of the presentations where we will be using the chat function. So you'll see at the top of the screen there is a Q&A function. There's also a chat function. To make it easy for me to navigate, can we please try and use the chat function rather than the Q&A? Okay. All attendees are muted, so we won't be able to hear you talk. So another reason why we must use the chat function, and that way we can keep a record of all the questions that were answered. And if we aren't able to get to your question today, we can get back to it after the event and email you directly. Okay, so the purpose of today is to introduce you to the project and explain why this research is necessary. We want to present results from phase 1 and plans for phase 2. I'll just start off by telling you how this project came about. So I myself am a licensed hemp grower and I'm very, very passionate about the hemp industry, as my colleagues already know. I'm also a PhD graduate in animal nutrition, mainly ruminant nutrition. I have a background in dairy and looking at nutritional value of forages. So this topic is very dear to my heart. I attended a ministerial roundtable back in 2018, just talking about challenges the hemp industry faced. And a lot of the discussion was around hemp, grazing or feeding hemp to livestock and what the regulations were and whether there was going to be any progress in that. We have someone with a raised hand. Can everybody hear me? Everyone can hear, yes. Glennis has a raised hand. I can't see any urgent problems, so I'm just going to continue at this stage. So I recognized that there was a gap in the knowledge around this topic. And I started doing a bit of investigation and realized that there was a global shortage of information or data on hemp, industrial hemp as a forage for livestock. There's been some research done on the seed, but nothing on the plant itself, on the biomass. Someone from within DPIRD suggested that I contact Ken Dodds from the Chem Centre. So I did. And I think the first thing Ken said to me was, "I've been waiting for this phone call." So it all sort of kicked off from there. Ken introduced me to Gai Krebs from Charles Sturt Uni. Gai is an animal nutritionist, and we put together Opening the Gates to Hemp Grazing Livestock in Australia, which has been very kindly funded by AgriFutures. Today, let's see, next slide. Today we have quite a full program. So we're going to start with a word from our sponsors and partners. We've got Tom McHugh representing AgriFutures, Bruce Mullen from Deep Herd, Ken Dodds from Chem Centre, and Gay Krebs from Charles Sturt University. Following our partners, I will give a quick background to the project background to the project and its aims. We will hear from Chris May from Chem Centre, who will be giving us an introduction to cannabinoids. Our two honours students from the project, Dana White and Danny De Rosa, will be presenting. Unfortunately, though, Dana cannot be with us today, so Gay will be presenting on Dana's behalf. And then Gay Krebs will give us a summary of key messages from phase 1 and a where to next introduction. And then I will introduce phase 2. We will then open the floor to our Q&A session. So without further ado, let's hear from our sponsors and project partners. We're going to start with Tom McHugh from AgriFutures, and Tom's given us a couple of slides to talk to. Tom is the Senior Manager for the Emerging Industries Program. Tom.
Thanks, Bronwyn, and thanks everyone. It's great to see such a positive response to this very, very important topic. So yeah, as Bronwyn alluded to, I look after the Emerging Industries Program at AgriFutures Australia, and we look at all the, I guess, agricultural commodities that have enormous growth potential. Might get you to go to the next slide. Thanks, Bronwyn.
Certainly.
So our overarching strategy is to identify and support the emergence of agricultural industries that can reach or exceed a gross value production threshold of at least $10 million per annum within the next 5 years. And so part of our support of this particular work by the department and its collaborators through Chem Centre and Charles Sturt University was really to look at how we can look at some really high value options for industrial hemp, given that we're already investing in the space. And so we certainly believe that hemp has the potential to reach that $10 million threshold that we're referring to. We might just go to the next slide. So yeah, as far as the story so far, when we first looked at industrial hemp, we saw that a whole breadth of opportunities for the end users of the product, specifically around food, but looking at a whole range of things, whether it was oils, food products, more increasingly now into fibre, and looking at other uses of the hemp plant itself and herd. So there's quite a wide and diverse variety of products that hemp offers, but it was only really when we put a call out and Bronwyn approached us that we actually looked at some more of the value adds from a production sense. And so this project for us was very appealing because the whole use of hemp as a potential substitution product in animal feeds was one that we really wanted to explore and to give farmers and hemp producers a range of options to think about when producing the crop. Next slide. And there's real data to back it up. These are recent statistics from the Department of Agriculture and Water, and basically look at through ABARES, look at the flock numbers for both sheep and beef. And so they're two of our major primary industries. And for us, looking at some opportunities to exploit our emerging industries to be a contributor in those value chains seemed to be highly elusive for AgriFutures. Next slide. So from our point of view, while we continue to develop industrial hemp for its end of use products, we certainly wanted to move into this work to see whether or not there was opportunities to use hemp for grazing and forage techniques. And so we've got two projects in this space. Today's one is really through the department. We also have some work happening in Tasmania as well in this area. But for today, you know, we certainly want to look at the potential opportunities as a feed for ruminants, to look at whether or not there's any impacts from that process, and also just to look at how the diets impact on the animal performance. And without going into the depth of the information, which we'll shortly hear from all the project collaborators, we're excited as a funding body just to continue to evolve this work going into the future. And so I might actually pass on now. If you've got any questions, obviously give us a call at AgriFutures Australia, because we are doing a lot of work in hemp, but certainly excited by where the project has come to in the short time that we've funded it. So I might pass back to you, Bronwyn, to move on to the substance.
Thank you, Tom. I'm going to pass everyone on to Bruce Mullen now. Bruce is the Director of Livestock Industries at the Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development, and he'll just give us a couple of words about DPIRD's involvement and perspective with this project. Bruce.
Thanks, Bronwyn. And can I say at the start, congratulations to you for pulling this event together, this webinar. And obviously, I'm very aware of your passion for this, but passion doesn't always, you need more than passion. And you've done a great job in getting so many people involved across so many bits of parts of government and industry, which is great. So your sheep and cattle are really important to WA in terms of agriculture industries. So it's combined, they're well over $2 billion, plus all the processing jobs, etc., that go with it. And it's never been a better time to be in the livestock industry, with record prices for sheep and cattle. But that's the good bit. Both those industries are really having to deal with the impacts of climate change, whatever you want to call it. The weather patterns are changing, and so many of our farmers are really struggling with how to maintain livestock during many months of the year, just through lack of feed and in some cases water, but certainly feed. And so we're certainly focused on what we can do to close that feed gap, if you like, which would be through sort of late summer into autumn, depending on the season. And so anything that we can do around that, and hemp has the potential to fill that gap for some farmers, not probably on a broad scale, but certainly for some people, it could be a good option at certain times of the year. So that's sort of why we're interested in it. But of course, the other aspect about all this is that we're very proud of the products, the meat quality of beef and lamb that we produce, and we can't afford to affect that in any way. So whether that be just through quality, but also through, obviously, if there's any hint of anything being in the meat that makes it unsafe, then that's a real concern. So safety is really important, and it's really good that this project is taking that into account. So I'll leave it there, Bronwyn. Just thanks everyone for joining and supporting the work, and thanks to AgriFutures. And I look forward to hearing the outcome from this meeting.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Bruce. Our next project partner we're hearing from Ken Dodds from Chem Centre. Ken is a food scientist and coordinator of primary industries research at Chem Centre. Take it away, Ken.
Yeah, good morning to everybody, and it's really pleasing to see the number of people who are participating in this extension. It has been very exciting to be part of this project's evolution. Chem Centre are a fairly old government institution in Australia, formerly being the West Australian Government's analytical capacity. From my perspective, we have participated extensively in studies of novel feeds over the years, and it is our analytical capacity that we bring to this project. I'm a food scientist, so the regulatory capacity aspects of this are of strong interest to me. We bring to the table our cannabinoid capacity as a forensic group servicing the WA Police, but also our residue capacity, which we provide to the Department of Health here in Western Australia, because we're a foundation member of the West Australian Food Monitoring Program. The planning of this project and the delivery of the project have been massively enabled by the interaction with Charles Sturt University and Gai Krebs, and also with Bronwyn here in Western Australia. It's not likely that Chem Centre will be out in the field feeding cattle. What we're providing is the back end, the analytical support, the trial design support, and the financial support for the project as well. So it's been a pleasure to be involved, and looking forward to moving through the what is to be presented today and participating in the discussion at the end.
Thank you, Ken. Our last project partner who will speak today is Associate Professor Gai Krebs from Charles Sturt University, and Gai is Associate Professor with the School of Animal and Veterinary Sciences. Gai.
I'd just like to follow all our other team members in welcoming everybody today. It is really exciting, so many participants in this webinar. All I can say is from the very beginning, when Ken first rang me to discuss this project, it has felt like I've won the lottery. It is one of the most exciting research programs I've ever been involved in. For the past 30 years, I've been involved in research looking at alternative feeds and the promotion of those green machines known as ruminants, who can convert agro-industrial byproducts into animal protein. So it's been a great project so far, and I can't wait to see what else we find out moving forward. So thanks, Bronwyn.
Thank you, everybody. Right, let's get into it. So I'm going to give you a little bit of information on the background of this project and what we're trying to achieve. First, let me talk about why this research is necessary. So there's three main reasons that I've identified here. Number one, the diversification of cropping and forage options in a changing climate. So the wonderful thing about hemp is it's a high yielding summer crop, and this could make it an asset for the livestock industry in particular in terms of feeding the summer autumn feed gap. You know, not much else grows at that time of year in the summer period, and hemp is, as I mentioned, an extremely high yielding green feed. The second reason is to support the growth of the emerging hemp industry. As Tom mentioned, the hemp industry is still young but has a lot of potential, and if growers were able to use it to feed animals, it would not only add value to the crop but also attract newcomers to the industry. The third reason we've identified is that it's a novel feed source that could benefit animal, human, or environmental health, or all three together. You know, cannabis has a reputation for being a bit of a wonder plant. We all know it has powerful medicinal properties for humans, for example, in terms of pain management and appetite stimulation. Can these pass on to our livestock? We don't know yet. So we're just going to look at if there's any potential for health benefits or value-added end products in the livestock industry. Hemp's quite a complex plant in terms of its chemistry makeup. So whether this has implications for meat quality, for example, is also something we would like to investigate. Okay, for those of you who haven't seen hemp before, it looks exactly like cannabis because it is cannabis. Hemp is the low THC variety of cannabis sativa. It, as you can see, is very high yielding. This crop here is a West Australian crop grown by one of the founding committee members from the WA Hemp Growers Cooperative, Hemp Grow. And as you can see, there's a significant amount of biomass here. Not all hemp crops grow that large. It depends what you're growing it for, but you can see what the potential is. It can produce 5 to 15 tonnes of biomass per hectare. All right, it can also grow in a wide range of climates. Its water requirements are comparable to cereal grains provided adequate moisture is present at sowing. Hemp is also a multi-purpose crop. As you can see from this infographic on the right-hand side, you can use pretty much every part of the plant for something. That gives it quite amazing economic potential. All right, so for hemp to become a more attractive cropping option to farmers, particularly broadacre farmers in mixed farming systems, they must be able to graze livestock on it in order for them to get the most value out of the plant possible. So therefore, investigation into industrial hemp biomass as a fodder source for livestock is necessary to progress the emerging hemp industry. Favourable results will provide farmers with an additional cropping option and a summer fodder source for livestock in regions suitable for growing hemp. Now with this slide, I just wanted to try and demonstrate the value that might be gained from allowing or being able to utilise hemp as a forage crop. So this is a cost-benefit analysis that I did with one of our internal economists. Like all cost-benefit analysis, there is a list of assumptions as long as my arm, but the situation we chose for this was something that we thought was going to be quite common in practice. So there are several scenarios where hemp may be used as a forage, and for the purpose of this analysis, we have focused on using livestock to clean up post-seed harvest biomass. Okay, so this is for a grain crop and it's an irrigated crop. The objective of this analysis was to quantify value of grazing hemp stubbles compared to adding soil carbon. So currently, as you know, farmers cannot graze hemp stubbles. Once you harvest a seed crop, you just got to turn it into the soil, leave all that biomass there. It might be possible in the future to accrue carbon credits for this. So this is what we've done in this study. We've calculated the net return in live weight gain for a flock of 2,000 sheep grazing at 50 hectares of hemp stubble compared to just turning it into the soil and accruing value through carbon credits. So option one is where we've grazed stubbles and subtracted additional purchase feed. And you can see there's about $113,000 in value for each year. Option two is purchasing all feed in and accruing carbon credits. And there's a slight difference between year 1 and 2. Year 1 subtracts the value or the cost of getting a carbon audit done. And you can see there's significant more value to the farmer in being allowed to graze their livestock on this crop. That's the message I want you to get out of this slide. Right, so by now I hope you've got some idea of the value of this research and why it's important. Now let's talk about regulations. Each Australian state has slightly different policies in this space, but they all generally have the same outcome or message, and that is THC is considered a contaminant. Now, contaminants cannot be present in animal products unless Food Standards Australia New Zealand has set a safe allowable level or a maximum level. Due to a significant lack of data globally in this space, FSANZ has not set a maximum level for THC in animal products. They can't. There's no data in this space. So therefore, the current tolerance for THC in animal products is 0. Now, as part of this project, we sort of dabbled with the idea of helping FSANZ to create a safe maximum level, but after consultation with them, we realized that this is very challenging and requires a lot of data. So it could be a long-term objective, but for now, we would like to try and concentrate on what we need to do to ensure that any animal product going to market has 0 THC. So we'd like to create an industry code of practice, for example, around feeding hemp to livestock to make sure that these products are safe. All right, let's get into the project itself. So we've divided this project into 2 phases, phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 is already complete, and they are the results we're going to present today. it was a bit of a pilot study, you know, because there wasn't a lot of research done in this field. We didn't have a lot to go on, so we decided to test as much as we could with the budget we had. We measured nutrient digestibility in vivo. We measured cannabinoid residues and looked at animal performance, all in one animal trial. And we used hemp stubble. So that's after the crop was harvested. These are actually pictures of the material that we used. The two pictures on the left are before the seed was harvested. So after the seed was harvested, it was run through a tub grinder, and in that little picture on the right, that's what came out of it. Extremely fibrous, woody material that we then had to put through a hay buster and then make into pellets. I do not recommend anyone try that. It was it was fun. We got there, but very, very challenging. Now we will be presenting results from phase 1 a little bit later. But I just want to give you an idea of what we're going to do in the future too. That phase 2, we will be focusing on cannabinoids, and that's largely as a result of what we've discovered in phase 1. But we will also be looking at nutrient digestibility, and we will use 4 animal trials in phase 2. But like I said, I'll go into more detail in that a bit later. Phase 3, who knows? We're just going to focus on phase 1 and 2 at the moment, and the results will guide us. So these are the objectives we were we were aiming towards in phase 1. I'll just read them out for you. So number 1 was to analyse and understand nutritional value of whole plant hemp as a potential feed for ruminants. And again, it was the hemp stubbles that we investigated. Number 2, measure cannabinoid excretion from sheep and accumulation in meat. And number 3, measure animal performance and carcass traits of sheep fed diets containing hemp at various inclusion levels. The outcomes are to provide preliminary information necessary for development of an industry code of practice for feeding hemp biomass to ruminants, and to advance adoption of industrial hemp as a new forage option for irrigated and broadacre farming areas. All right. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to show you a little video about phase 1 soon. But first, I would like to give you a little bit more background into the chemistry of cannabis. It's important that you know about the complexity of this plant to understand why there hasn't been a lot of research done on this on a global scale. So Chris May, so I'll just go back to this previous slide. This presentation is by Dr. Chris May. He's a senior chemist at Chem Centre, bit of an expert in cannabinoids. Unfortunately, Chris can't be with us today, but he has pre-recorded his presentation for us. So let's see if this, there we go. Oops, one sec.
Before the rest of the team take you through some of the findings from the study. So cannabis is
Bronwyn, there's no sound.
No sound, Bronwyn.
Herbaceous flowering herb, which means it has distinctly male and female organisms. There are up to 3 different species that have been identified, the primary ones being Cannabis sativa and Cannabis indica, with Cannabis ruderalis bringing up the third. There are varieties, strains and cultivars that can be cultivated for specific characteristics depending on the intended application. So these can include for fibre production or seeds for food purposes, as well as specific cannabinoids for medicinal purposes. The definition of industrial hemp does vary between the different states with regard to the THC content, but in general is between 0.3 and 1% THC. Cannabinoids and terpenes are the main compounds of interest that we're talking about here, and these are secreted by the trichomes, which are the little oily hairs that we see here. These are primarily concentrated around the buds of the flowers. So
roll.
Hello everyone, my name's Chris and
Forward. Can you hear?
I'm tetrahydrocannabinol or THC and cannabidiol or CBD. We can break down the cannabinoids into some subclasses. So we have the phytocannabinoids, which are produced in plants, endocannabinoids, which are produced in the body, and synthetic cannabinoids, which are produced in vitro. So this production pathway for cannabinoids obviously starts in the cannabis plant, where there are two main precursor cannabinoids, sometimes referred to as the parent cannabinoid. So the main ones are cannabigerolic acid, or CBGA, and cannabigerolinic acid, or CBGVA. So we can see a pathway for production here where essentially there is an enzymatic reaction which will take our CBGA and CBGVA through to the other acidic forms, which you can see in terms of a chemical structure on the right-hand side here. These can then be decarboxylated, essentially removing this carboxy group here. Now this can be performed either with temperature or UV light, and we end up with these decarboxylated versions, such as the delta 9 THC that you see here. There is then a further oxidative step which occurs, and we end up producing some products such as your CBNs and your CBEs. So I mentioned receptors before. These are part of what's referred to as the endocannabinoid system, which exists in all vertebrates. Essentially, we have CB1 and CB2 receptors. So the CB1 receptors are primarily found in the brain and central nervous system of the organism, and to a lesser extent some of the other tissues, whereas the CB2 receptors are more in the peripheral organs and often associated with the immune system. Essentially, these cannabinoids end up binding to these receptors and can have an agonist or antagonist sort of reaction, which produces a range of different effects. So those effects are being studied as part of those sort of medicinal cannabis and cannabinoid therapies. You can see a range of different applications for the various cannabinoids in the table that is on your screen. So these can include treating issues associated with pain and sleep problems, psychiatric and neurological disorders, eating and digestive disorders, and specific diseases, other benefits you can see listed through here. Something that is worth noting here is that we can end up with one cannabinoid that will have an agonistic effect and be an appetite stimulant in THC, whereas the THCV version will be an appetite suppressant as an antagonist. Once these cannabinoids are within the body, they undergo a metabolic pathway. And so we have an enzymatic reaction that will produce up to about 100 different THC metabolites. Of those, the primary one is the 11-hydroxy delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol, or 11-hydroxy-THC, which we can see top right here. There's further reactions that will produce the 11-nor-9-carboxy delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol, apologies, and then the glucurinated version of that down the bottom here. So the glucuronide complex is more water soluble, more readily excreted in the urine. Some of these other forms, for example, the 11-hydroxy, is more commonly excreted in the feces. Of note here is that the 11-hydroxy THC and the original delta 9 THC are both seen as psychoactive. So when it comes to analysing these compounds at ChemCentre, we have a couple of different methods. The first of which is the simple determination of a cannabinoid profile. So this is applicable to plants, oils, and other pharmaceutical formulations. It involves the determination of 11 different phytocannabinoids and 2 calculated analytes. These can then be analysed using liquid chromatography mass spectrometry, which you can see as the instrument down here. This is about a 15-minute run and produces limits of quantification around the 10 milligrams per kilogram. Alternatively, we have the method for determination of cannabinoids and metabolites, and this is applicable to our biological matrices. So things things like plasma, urine, feces, various organs, etc. So this involves the determination of the 4 main cannabinoids of interest and 3 metabolites that are most commonly encountered. So once again, this is a liquid chromatography mass spectrometry method, this time a 12-minute run with limits of quantification sitting around the 5 micrograms per litre. So why undertake this analysis at Chem Centre? So we are a statutory authority of the Western Australian State Government. We're the longest continuously NATA-accredited laboratory in Australia with accreditation number 8, with the determination of cannabinoids appearing on our scope of accreditation. We are also certified Good Manufacturing Practice and the Therapeutic Goods Administration Manufacturing Licence for the testing laboratory. We have the Forensic Science Laboratory in-house with expertise in both toxicology and illicit drugs analysis, providing services for the Western Australian Police as well as the State Coroner. We also provide commercial services for certification of THC levels in industrial hemp for a variety of state and territory regulation authorities, and medicinal cannabis testing for various cultivators, manufacturers and importers from right around Australia as well as internationally. So in summary, industrial hemp is a low THC variety of cannabis. There are over 100 different cannabinoids that have been identified, and these are produced through various reaction pathways. They will get into the body and bind with cannabinoid receptors, and they will produce a variety of different effects. They can then be metabolized into various forms, and they're excreted from the body over time and can be analysed at Chem Centre using liquid chromatography mass spectrometry. So we have a few references here for some of the images that you saw earlier and the information. Unfortunately, I can't be with you live today, but if you do have any questions, my details are up on the screen right now. Please do feel free to email me through or give me a call. And thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you very much to Chris May for putting that together for us. So I guess one of the main messages from that presentation is that there's more than one cannabinoid in cannabis. Okay, THC is the main one we've all heard of. That's the psychoactive one that gets you stoned if you smoke marijuana. And that's the one that most people are concerned about in terms of residues for obvious reasons. But there are many more cannabinoids, and that's what makes cannabis quite a complex plant. In terms of THC, there's not just one form of THC, there are several metabolites, and we needed to consider this when doing our analysis. Now, I'm going to play another video for you. This will be an introduction to phase 1. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so I can bring this other video up. So bear with me for a minute. Let me try and find it. Share screen. Where are you? There you are. Let's. Can you see, Gay? Can you give me some? So is it the right screen I'm sharing? Excellent. We're winning.
Yes, you're right. This project came about because I was approached by members from the Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development in Western Australia and the Chemistry Centre, who were really interested in looking at alternative uses of hemp, as it is a highly promoted industry in Western Australia. So the research we're involved in here is we're looking at the usefulness of stubble, the leftover crop from the harvesting of an industrial hemp crop. And so this is the first trial in what we hope will be a series of trials where we evaluate effectively the feeding value of this stubble. So it's a controlled experiment with a limited number of animals because we want to do some intensive measures. So we've got 3 different diets and they're all relatively the same nutritive value. And then we've got varying amounts of hemp stubble in these pellets. So what we call the control pellet, which is the one that's got no hemp in it, contains 56% cereal stubble or cereal straw, which is the basis of the roughage that they put in pellets. And then the other two pellets, one is 56% hemp stubble in the pellet, and then the middle pellet is a 50-50% mix.
So initially I was a bit surprised because I didn't know much about hemp as a crop. But then once I looked into it, I was actually really curious about how we can, I guess, utilize all the byproducts that it creates. Okay, so I'm looking at the nutrient digestibility of the crop, effectively how the sheep digest and utilize specific nutrients.
My portion of this trial is looking into the THC content of the pellets and how that's going to store inside the fat of the animal.
Hemp's a really interesting crop. It requires relatively little water to grow it, and we see an expansion of the hemp industry worldwide, including Australia. It would be creating an alternative industry for the hemp growers, but from my interest, it creates an alternative feed for livestock producers.
We have seen so far a 10% increase in feed intake between the control group and the higher hemp group. The use of hemp as a feed will be amazing for the industry just because it'll make people aware of how many different feeds there are out there and what we can use byproducts for, as opposed to just letting them go to waste. It was pretty much considered worthless. So if we get it as a stock feed, that's amazing.
Without funding from AgriFutures and involvement across the states, I don't think this project would have got up and be running and gaining momentum so quickly.
Alright, just plug my headphones back in. Okay. So
Let's get into some results. Let me just did I just stop sharing?
Yes, you need to reshare your screen again, Brian.
Yes, I do. Okay.
Yes.
What can you
So
see,
it's
Brian?
on.
Are you still seeing the video?
Yes, phase one video.
Okay, all right.
You need to click onto the next slide.
Has that come up?
There we go.
Okay.
It's perfect.
Hold on. Wait, sorry. Let me just get rid of this. Go away. All right, all right. Okay, so I'm going to pass you on to Gay Krebs now, who is presenting on behalf of Dana White. Dana was our honours student for phase one, along with Danny De Rosa. Gay, take it away.
Okay, so I'm going to be presenting, as Bronwyn said, on behalf of Dana, and it's important to understand that Danny and Dana worked on this trial together. And so when I talk about how we set up the trial, we're talking about the same animals, and Danny's work was just a continuation on after Dana's work. Now, remember from the background that Bronwyn has given you, we're starting from scratch. We haven't got any information on, there's no information in the literature about how animals perform or even utilise this material. We had no pre-ideas of whether or not the material would be palatable, whether it would have positive or adverse effects on the animals. And because I'm a ruminant nutritionist, we were not only interested in animal growth, but we wanted to start to understand what could happen in the animal, because ruminants are very, very different from humans. So the studies that have been done in humans are not necessarily relatable to ruminants, and that's particularly related to the liver of ruminants. So ruminants are sheep and cattle, and so they can have much different detoxification capability, we believe, based on other drug investigations than humans do. So even though there is literature available on the effects of cannabis per se in humans, whether or not this was relatable to ruminants was completely unknown. So we set out in Dana's part of the trial to look at how well the animals digested diets that contained hemp stubble, and then what did it do within the rumen of the sheep that we fed these, and how did they excrete cannabinoids in terms of which compounds, etc. So next slide, please, Bronwyn. Okay, so this is just showing you what the process material looks like. And it's important to highlight this because if we move forward with hemp stubble, we would also have to look at how you could better process this. But the focus really of this webinar and our research is to have the animals grazing the material. But there are some results from that I'm going to present you in a minute that thinks that if we could come up with some good processing technologies, you would consider putting this in virtually all pelleted ruminant diets. So we set about, next slide please. So we set up an experiment with just 3 diets. When you're doing a controlled animal house experiment, you really have to always minimise the number of animals that you need to get scientifically valid results. And we do that from an animal welfare perspective. And so we had a total of 15 sheep with 5 sheep across the 3 diets. And so this is, we've put the whole profile up here of cannabinoids so that you can see that for most of the cannabinoids, they were actually below the limits of reporting, but we did get some delta-9 THC and some THCA. So we certainly know that we've got cannabinoids in our diet, and we've also confirmed that there are no cannabinoids in the control diets. We did set out to make these diets as close as possible in terms of nutritive value, but often the best intention doesn't become the reality. So there are some slight differences in the nutritive value of the 3 diets, but all of these diets meet the nutritional requirements of this class of animals, okay, in terms of vitamins, minerals, energy, protein. So they are fully formulated experimental rations. So then we set out to see how we were going to, how these diets were going to affect the animals. You always have to have a controlled diet in a study so that you've got something to compare to. So next slide, please, Bronwyn. Okay, so what if we give some background, there has been a couple of little studies done where they've fed hemp seed and hemp seed cakes to animals, but absolutely nothing to do with hemp biomass. So, and when we're dealing with hemp seed and hemp seed byproducts, such as hemp seed cake, it is a completely different product. And so even our results are not comparable to those results. So we are the first, we believe, to have done a controlled feeding study, not only with hemp stubble, but actually with animals. So it's been, that's why it's such an exciting project to be involved in. So as we said, our aim in this first part was to look at nutrient digestibility and ruminal parameters. And when we're talking about ruminal parameters, we're talking compounds known as volatile fatty acids, which are produced by the fermentation in the rumen. And then also what happens when we feed them in terms of cannabinoids. So next one, please, Bronwyn.
All right. Gay, I'm just going to quickly look at the chat because I can see there's a few things going on and I just want to make sure it's not technical. And it's not. All right, thank you. I'm just not sure. Can you see that chat box when I bring it up?
Yes.
Yes, you can.
And
That's...
yes, you're correct. It is a low CBD content. Everything's low about this plant.
All right, great. Thanks. Next slide for Gay. There
Next
you go.
slide. Okay, so we set out, as I said, with 15 merino wethers being fed formulated rations to meet their nutrient requirements. They're about 12 months of age. They're all from the same background, so they're sourced off the same farm, same genetics, so that we don't introduce variability in relation to the animals. And as we highlighted in the video that we did with AgriFutures, what we did was just substitute the cereal straw that is typically in pelleted rations for sheep with varying amounts of hemp stubble. So either we had full substitution of the cereal straw or half substitution of the cereal straw. And then because to test palatability, you've actually got to give free access of the diet to the animals, not restricted access. So they were offered as much of these pellets as they wanted. We also fed them twice daily because the actual act of feeding penned sheep stimulates appetite. So we did everything that we could think of, a nice controlled environment, to look at, will this have any adverse effects on palatability? Next slide, please, Bronwyn. So what we were interested in, nutrient digestibility. So for those of you who are not familiar with how you determine nutrient digestibility, it really is just a simple matter of knowing what the nutrient content is of the feed that you give them, exact in terms of how many grams of dry matter or how many grams of protein or how many grams of the different fibre fractions, and then work out how much comes out in the feces, on a dry matter basis. So how much protein's in the feces, how much fibres in the feces. And from that you can estimate nutrient digestibility. So the higher the nutrient digestibility, the higher the value of that diet to the animals. We were then also interested in looking at the rumen pH to make sure that, that it wasn't having any adverse effects. Like, even though it was a relatively high roughage diet, we wanted to make sure that it wasn't making the rumen acid in any ways, because when you can feed a pelleted diet with a relatively high grain content, you can have adverse effects on rumen pH and end up with what's known as either subclinical or clinical acidosis in the rumen. Check the ammonia concentrations, because that tells you a story about how efficient the microbes are working in the rumen, because it tells you if they've got enough nitrogen to meet their needs. And then we always look at volatile fatty acids. As I said previously, these are the end products of microbial degradation of feeds, and the animal derives most of its energy needs from these volatile fatty acids. And then, because this is the first feeding study ever involving hemp, we wanted to look at what was coming out in the feces and urine with respect to our cannabinoids. So Bronwyn, if we move on, please. Okay, so you can see why I start to get really excited from this slide when it comes to industrial hemp, because remember, I'm looking at, is this a good animal feed in the first instance? Okay, so what's circled in those green and red boxes highlights that when you include hemp in the diet or substitute cereal stubble with hemp stubble in these pelleted rations, you get a highly significant improvement in nutrient digestibility. Okay, so this is a reason to open a bottle of champagne. Okay, if you can get a feed that improves nutrient digestibility, it means the animal is able to extract more nutrients out of this diet. So it was so extremely exciting to see these results. We were not anticipating it. We actually had no pre-formed ideas, but it is, on analysis, not much better than cereal stubble. So we weren't expecting to see these profoundly significant improvements in nutrient digestibility. So that's the first big tick for hemp stubble we found. Okay, Bronwyn, if we can move to the next slide. And there were no adverse effects on intakes. Okay, these sheep never hesitated to consume the pellets that contained industrial hemp. Okay, I'm really glad that I can still smell, because trust me, these hemp pellets smell really nice as well. So there was nothing that deterred these sheep from eating these pellets. Great effects on digestibility. But what's interesting, if we look at the physical characteristics or the chemical composition of the straw, the hemp stubble, we can't at this stage clearly explain why we got such wonderful improvements in digestibility. So they're not really logical, but they're extremely valid scientific results. So that just opens up more research pathways for us to investigate. There was also an increase in crude protein digestibility, which is really important, but there, as I showed in the very early slide on the 3 diets, there are slight differences in the crude protein content of the diets. So we have to investigate this further, why there could be an improvement in crude protein digestibility. Bronwyn, if you go to the next slide, please. Okay, so now here comes the second glass of champagne. Okay, so we had the first glass of champagne with the nutrient digestibility, and now it's almost like a bottle you can have now, because the volatile fatty acids is what provides the animals with energy ultimately. And we have got just the most amazing increases in volatile fatty acid production. And surprisingly, it's in volatile fatty acids that we know very little about. These are known as the minor volatile fatty acids. So we need to know more about this. If you go looking in the literature, you go, oh, there's these minor volatile fatty acids. What do we know about them? And the answer is, we know they contribute positively to the energy economy of the animal, but that's about as much as we know. So all we're doing with this research is just opening up more and more research questions. We are not dealing with a standard feed in any way, feed ingredient here. But so far, everything about it is positive. It improves nutrient digestibility. It increases volatile fatty acid production, and particularly of our monovolatile fatty acids. And in terms of its feeding value, there's not a black mark. There's not a black mark against this stubble at all. It's a positive feed. Bronwyn, if we can go to the next slide. And so we can present to you now the first evidence that they excrete the cannabinoids. We've got the levels here that they excrete them. There were no cannabinoids evident in any of the feces of the control group. I should always keep saying that. The presence of 11-OH delta THC tells us that it is being metabolized by the ruminant animal. So, but it does excrete, and it's predominantly coming out in the feces. So but we need to do a lot more work with regards to the excretion, because this is still only a pilot study. Bronwyn, the next slide, please. So getting back to the volatile fatty acids, as I said, we've got increases in these minor volatile fatty acids. And so predominantly how you would get changes in your volatile fatty acids is that you've got a change in the composition of your rumen microbial population. And so that's going to be a focus of our next set of research as well. Okay, but we've improved digestibility. When you improve digestibility, not only do you improve nutrient supply to the animal, you'll improve nutrient supply to the microbes that inhabit the rumen as well. So just positives. I'll answer that straight away. It's apparent crude protein digestibility. I should have said that at the very beginning. I apologise. It's apparent nutrient digestibility. So we need to know more about what's going on in the rumen as we move forward with this research. Bronwyn, next slide, please. But what we did find from this when we come to excretion is that ruminants do appear to excrete a wider range of metabolites than humans. So again, highlighting that we don't necessarily look to any studies done in humans and try and relate them to ruminants, other than to say that they're different. Differing to human excretion, we had no THC, C2OH in urine either. And there was only, what was interesting, there was only one sheep that actually had detectable levels of cannabinoids in their urine. So, and we were collecting the urine daily and making a composite sample. So it seems that ruminants appear to be strongly excreting in the faeces. And so that will involve a need for further research to see if the proportions excreted in urine versus faeces is different than we see in human studies. Thanks, Bronwyn. Next slide. And that's enough from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gay. Now, I know there's some questions coming through in the chat, but we are going to continue and address the questions in the Q&A session at the end of the presentations. If we don't get to any of your questions, we have your email address. We can contact you directly. Now, next up is the Danny De Rosa. I hope I've pronounced that correctly, Danny. Now, Danny was involved, he was an honours student as well, and I believe this is one of the first times you're presenting these results, Danny. So yes. Let's give Danny our support. We look forward to hearing the results. Take it away.
Thank you. So as Gay said earlier, the results that I'm presenting today are from the same experiment as Dana's, but with more of a focus on THC residues and carcass characteristics. Next slide, please. So the focus of my research was on the effects of feeding varying levels of hemp stubble on feed intake and growth rates of sheep up until time of slaughter. And as Gay has also said, to date, no research has looked at hemp stubble with respect to these parameters. As previously highlighted in Dana's research, there is some information around regarding feeding of hemp seed or hemp seed cake, but nothing on hemp stubble. So we extended our research beyond looking at the effects of feed intake and growth to the effect on carcass characteristics, and importantly to determine if feeding low THC material resulted in any carcass residues. It's unknown how much THC and its precursors transfer to animal tissues when hemp seed or hemp biomass is consumed, and THC and its stereoisomers are highly lipophilic and accumulate in fat tissues, reaching peak concentrations 4 to 5 days after a single exposure. Body fat also has the ability to store very high amounts of THC and for long periods of time. And there's no information on how long that could be, but our aim in the first instance was to determine if residues are produced after feeding hemp rations. Next slide. So we fed sheep for 56 days and weighed them at regular intervals prior to morning feeding and working around Dana's conduct of the digestibility study. We also weighed them on the morning of dispatch to the abattoir. Once at the abattoir, with the appreciated assistance from CSU technicians and a PhD student, we followed the carcasses along the processing line. Electrical stimulation along the chain was used post-slaughter. Ear tag identification was matched with corresponding abattoir body number to maintain traceability through to the chillers. The liver, kidney, and kidney fat were collected for subsequent weighing and analysis of cannabinoid content. After chilling overnight, the carcasses were transferred from the abattoir to the meat labs at CSU and aged in the chiller for 7 days. And then they were split, and from the left side, we took samples from the subcutaneous fat at the rump, and the strip loin was removed from the left side, and each carcass and each sample was fabricated into 2.5 centimeter slices. The first 3 slices were individually vacuum sealed, labeled, and stored at -18 degrees. And the second slice of the strip loin and subcutaneous fat samples were analyzed for cannabinoid content. Next slide. As shown in this graph here, there were no significant differences in dry matter intake between the treatment groups, and therefore we can conclude that hemp stubble has no adverse effects on palatability. From this, we can show that hemp stubble is suitable as a replacement for cereal stubble in pelleted rations. Next slide. Looking at the effects on sheep live weight, we also need to take into consideration that these pellets were formulated to be the same nutritive value, but they weren't. The control pellets were higher in energy with 9.9 megajoules per kilogram of dry matter, and the hemp 1 was 9.1 and hemp 2 9.6 megajoules. The circled data you can see here highlights where the sheep fed the hemp containing rations were significantly heavier than the control group. Next slide, please. What we can take from that is the partial or complete substitution of the cereal straw in the pelleted ration results in some difference in live weight, but by slaughter, there were no differences in the live weight of the animals. Looking at that in another context, the hemp containing pellets contained less energy than the control pellets, but we managed to get ultimately the same weight gain. So per unit of intake, weight gain is actually higher for those fed the hemp pellets, and therefore the efficiency of energy utilization is greater in sheep fed the hemp ration. Thus, and then we know from Dana's results that the inclusion of hemp improved nutrient digestibility. So this would also contribute to the improved efficiency of energy utilization. Next slide, please. Here we're looking at the carcass data. Given that there are no significant differences in turnover live weights, it's not entirely surprising that there are no significant differences in carcass traits. And as you can see from the fat scores, these are very well finished sheep with significant body fat stores. So if there were to be THC residues, we had the perfect carcasses to see this occur. Next slide. There was a slight tendency for increased liver weights, and this requires further research. The hepatotoxicity of CBD has been confirmed in a number of mouse model studies, as well as a study involving rhesus monkeys. We know from human studies that chronic cannabinoid use can cause fatty liver, but we do need to be mindful that comparing studies with ruminants to those involving monogastric animals is, you need to look into it differently. As Gay was mentioning before, the livers in ruminants have very different functional capability than monogastrics. But from the carcass data, we can show that hemp stubble is a suitable replacement for cereal stubble, as there were no adverse effects. Next slide. We are, as Gay also said, the first known researchers to report on residues in ruminants fed hemp stubble. All of the residues reported are extremely low when considering the duration of feeding. Of the organs collected, to date, only the liver has been assessed, with THCA being the only cannabinoid at detectable levels, and that was in 2 of the sheep fed the hemp 1 pellets and 2 of the sheep fed the hemp 2 pellets. For all of the sheep fed the pellets containing hemp stubble, the kidney fat contained THC, and the subcutaneous fat also contained THC, with the concentration being higher in the sheep fed the hemp 1 pellet than those fed the hemp 2 pellets. For all the sheep fed the hemp 1 pellet, the fat sample from the loin contained THC, and only 1 sheep fed the hemp 2 pellet had THC in the loin sample. Next slide. So with this, we can show that even with the low THC content, inclusion of hemp stubble into pelleted rations results in residues in the carcass. And under current legislation, those residues are an issue, but they are extremely low, and the levels are detectable, but based on very low levels of cannabinoids in the feed. The cannabinoid dose received by the animals is also higher than comparable human doses due to the large amount of feed consumed. And with all the promising results we've shown with regard to using hemp stubble, we just need to figure out what the withholding periods are required to eliminate these residues. And both Gay and Bronwyn will be talking about this. Thank you.
Excellent job, Danny. Thank you so much. So I think the results that everyone were waiting for were the cannabinoid residues. And as Danny has shown, yes, there were residues, but and as Danny mentioned, we fed these sheep for a long time. They were very fat. So if they were going to have residues, this was the best situation we could offer. And these residues were extremely low. So micrograms per kilogram dry matter. You know, when you're eating a steak, you're not going to eat it as dry matter. You're going to eat it as a fresh weight. So this would dilute cannabinoid levels even further. But yeah, very interesting to see these results, and that has dictated sort of where we're going to be going with phase 2, which is a great segue to Gay's next section, where to now. So Gay will just go over the results from phase 1 and some of the research directions we could go towards throughout the next phase of the project and through phases beyond. Gay.
Thanks, Bronwyn. We'll just go on to the next slide. So what we know in terms of its nutrient digestibility, palatability, feed intake, animal performance, it is a suitable feed for ruminants. Okay, it has these major impacts on volatile fatty acids, which enhances energy utilisation in the ruminant animal and other positive things. Okay, but there's residues. Okay, so we're not going to just put our heads in the sand and go, well, what do we do to do that? So what we want to do next slide, please, Bronwyn. So all of this research was done with stubble. So we've established, except for the fat residues, which I'll come to, we've established that stubble is a useful feed for ruminants. Okay, and on our analysis, it's actually better than cereal straws. Okay, but as Bronwyn highlighted at the very beginning, we want to see not only that after you harvest the seed, but what about the potential of just using hemp as a grazing crop in the green state? So we now want to effectively take what we've got from stubble and see if we're going to get even better results with the green material. We've already done some preliminary analysis on some early stage around the 5-6 leaf stage cannabis. Hemp, we call it hemp, don't call it cannabis. Anybody thinks I've been smoking, okay? On the hemp, and we're talking a protein content in this young leaf material around 30%. So like that makes you open and get another bottle of champagne. And I don't even drink, okay? But it's got real potential as a feed, okay? High protein, but we could also potentially have higher cannabinoid content. And if that was the case, so there is potentially even a greater potential for residues when we look at the green material. But the green material is the one that could fill in that feed gap that happens across so much of Australia in that summer-autumn period. So it's so worthy of investigation. So Bronwyn, is there another slide still to come? Okay, so with all of this, first of all, we need a bigger research team, because I know about nutrients and utilisation, but we need a much bigger research team. So we've put a stronger research team together. So we want to look at the pharmacokinetics of this hemp material. So we'll be undertaking pharmacokinetics studies, but we're also going to test this in both sheep and cattle. If there's no differences in terms of the pharmacokinetics of this material between sheep and cattle, it means we can continue to address our research questions using sheep, because it's so much easier and way less expensive to undertake studies in sheep than in cattle. But our pharmacokinetic studies will establish whether they are the appropriate model. As I said before, livers are not just livers when it comes to ruminants, but there's been other trials involving effectively drugs where they've found quite significant differences in this case, it was opioid metabolism between sheep and cattle. So we'll see if there's a similar difference when it comes to cannabinoids. And the pharmacokinetics, part of that study would also provide us with an understanding of the deposition and excretion of cannabinoids within ruminant animals. So next slide, please. And then we're going to do the repeat of like the first experiment. So we're going to look at palatability to just see if it's as palatable as the stubble, and we're expecting it to be more palatable. Again, reassess nutrient digestibility, because that's how you determine the feeding value of any material. And then to just look again and hopefully confirm and get a greater understanding of how feeding hemp material impacts the rumen environment. But what we're going to add to it in this next phase, we hope, is that we're actually going to start looking at the rumen microbiome. So to see how it's changing microbial populations. And we're also then going to look at the fecal microbiome to see if it's having any impact on the microbial populations that you find in the hindgut of the animals. And then we will also start looking, because these would be controlled animal experiments, we would also then start feed the diets to these animals, then take them off the diet, and then do fat biopsies for as long as it takes till we can get back to zero residues in the fat biopsies. So that's just a quick snapshot of where I think we're going to from now, but Bronwyn's going to add more detail and also add more information about what we're planning to do in Western Australia. So Bronwyn, back to you.
Better unmute myself. Thank you, Gay. All right. So I hope that gives everyone a good overview of what we have achieved so far. I can see the chat function flashing away. We will get to your questions soon. We've just got a tiny bit more to get through, and then I'm going to open the floor to everybody. So I'd like to just go into phase 2. Gay's already described a bit about what we're going to do. Let's see, next slide. Here are our objectives. So this time we're going to focus a lot on cannabinoids, because this is the most important part of our research. If we can't demonstrate that this is a safe feed for animals, then we might as well just stop here. Okay, so we're going to put a lot of effort into understanding what the cannabinoids do in the rumen. So objectives, I'm going to read these out to you. Number 1, measure and determine cannabinoid digestion, metabolism, storage, and excretion. So that's pharmacokinetics in sheep and cattle, and remobilization in sheep. Number 2, we will measure and establish the nutritive value of hemp forage as a potential green feed for ruminants. So again, doing what we did in phase 1, but with the green feed instead of the stubble. Number 3, measure the effect of exposure time. So we haven't talked about this one yet, and dose on cannabinoid deposition and remobilization in brain, liver, kidney fat, muscle, and subcutaneous fat in ruminants. I'll go into that in a little more detail soon, a little bit later. Okay, the outcomes are advancing understanding of cannabinoid digestion and metabolism in ruminants, including half-life, excretion pathways, and clearance from subcutaneous fat, muscle, liver, and kidneys. Now, we're talking about cannabinoids here, but a lot of them are very minor and will come in below the limits of reporting. So the main results we're going to get are for the major cannabinoids, THC and CBD. Phase 2 outcomes. Advancing understanding of cannabinoid digestion and metabolism in ruminants. I already read that one. Number 2, improved knowledge of feed value. And number 3, knowledge of the effect of hemp feed on cannabinoid consumption, on deposition and clearance from tissues. Okay, so I'm actually going to introduce a new speaker now. I'm going to introduce Dr. Beth Penrose from the University of Tasmania. Now, the reason Beth is talking is because the UniTas team, also being funded by AgriFutures, are investigating a similar growth stage, so the vegetative growth stage as we are. And it's wonderful that we're going to get some additional data to supplement our studies. So I'm going to let Beth quickly talk about the project they're doing before I show you the more detailed project plan for phase 2. So let me just move on to the next slide. There we go. Oops, welcome, Beth.
Hi guys. So Bronwyn has allowed me to have a few minutes to talk about our project, which is very sort of helpful, I guess, to the WA project, and their project is extremely helpful to us. So, you know, Tasmania grows about 80% of Australia's hemp. And so we're doing some work here about whether we can use hemp for grazing or as a dual purpose seed and grazing kind of crop. So our project is funded by AgriFeatures, but also by the Tasmanian Hemp Association. And then we also have some seed companies who are providing some in-kind contributions. If I could have the next slide, Roman. Excellent. So I have been doing some work with students around the nutritional composition of hemp. So we did do originally some work on stubble and had very similar problems with trying to chop it up. But since then, we've been looking at whether you could actually graze it in the sort of vegetative stage. And I had an honours student last year who was looking at, well, if you're going to grow it and you want to graze it, when do you want to graze it? And so one of the reasons that you want to know that is, well, when is the nutritional composition the best? And as you can see, these are just two examples. We've got loads of data. You know, as with many crops, the protein decreases with maturity and the fiber increases. If you want to go to the next slide. So this is, these data are actually a mean of growth stages 12 to 16. And if we use what we think is probably the best growth stage in terms of nutritional composition, which is growth stage 13, which is at 3-leaf stage, then you probably get slightly better results. But with these mean data, you can see that the crude protein, which is the first one, is fairly similar to legumes, forage legumes like lucerne, for example, and the NDF and ADF, so neutral digestible fibre and acid digestible fibre, are fairly similar, if not lower, and that means that it's probably slightly more digestible. And the ash content is pretty high, and that represents the amount of minerals. Now, we didn't do any experiments on the actual exactly which minerals those are contributing, but certainly one could do in future work. So I guess what we're trying to say is it's not that different. If you graze it early enough, it's not actually that different to grazing lucerne. Or other forage legumes. Yeah. So what we also wanted to know, okay, so the nutritional composition might be all right, but if you cut it really early, does it actually grow back? Because, you know, I'm a grass researcher generally. Grass is pretty cool because you cut it and then it miraculously grows back. But hemp's not kind of like that. It's not in the same family at all. You know, grasses are monocots and hemp is a dicot. It's a completely different plant. And so what we did is we grazed them by cutting them at 5 centimeters, like you do with lucerne. But basically when you did that, they didn't grow back, they died. And the reason for that is because you actually are cutting off even all of the true leaves, so just the cotyledons, just the seed leaves are left, and they're a bit rubbish at doing photosynthesis. So basically it had no power, no solar power in order to be able to grow back. And so we found that grazing to 5 centimeters just wasn't doable. And so what we did, we grazed them to 12 centimeters, which may simulate a kind of crash grazing, where sheep may nip off the tops and then all the leaves, and they did grow back after that. And plants cut at the growth stage 13, which is at 3-leaf stage, grew back the best. So it pretty much had the best nutritive value, or very high nutritive value in comparison to the other ones, and it also grew back the best, so that was pretty good. And I think there might be one last slide. Yeah. So what we're doing is we've got a 2-year trial. We've got 2 field sites in different parts of Tasmania. And what we really need to know, which is different to what Bronwyn and co want to know, but very complementary, is we're looking at which varieties have the best nutritional composition, because as a plant scientist, I know that different varieties can have widely different nutritive value and nutritional composition. So what we're trying to look at is, well, can we identify some varieties which have better nutritional composition for animal feed than others? What we also want to know is, well, when do you graze it? So we've done only glasshouse experiments to do this, and anybody who's done any field experiments versus glasshouse experiments will know that the results are very different often. So we want to check that we know about when to graze it, and that can help Bronwyn and those guys also to inform some of their field work as well. And how much does early grazing affect seed yield? So in canola, for example, and in wheat, actually early grazing can reduce the amount of vegetative growth, and can also increase seed yield by stressing the plant essentially to putting more energy into their seeds than into the vegetative parts. And so what we're trying to work out is, well, do you get a penalty for grazing in terms of seed yield, or could you actually enhance seed yield by grazing? Also in Tasmania anyway, we have a massive problem with the stubble. There's not a huge amount you can do with it, and often you have to burn it. And so if we can reduce the amount of vegetative growth, we can actually reduce the amount that you're burning too. And I think that might be it. So if you have any questions, yeah, please let me know.
Thanks so much, Beth, for coming along today. All right, we're hoping that we can combine the results of these 2 projects and hopefully inspire other projects to start up as well, so that we can advance our knowledge in this field as quickly as possible. Now, I'm going to finish off the presentations by just giving you this experimental design for phase 2. So as we have mentioned, there are 4 experiments in phase 2, and they're all going to focus on cannabinoids. 3 of the experiments will take place at Charles Sturt Uni and 1 at DPIRD. Experiment 1 will look at pharmacokinetics after an IV injection of a hemp extract. We're going to be looking at sheep and cattle. Experiment 2 will look at nutrient digestibility and rumen parameters in sheep. This will help us to understand nutritional value. And experiment 3, looking at cannabinoid excretion and fat biopsies whilst on clean feed, to get some idea around the time it takes for cannabinoids to clear from fat. And you know, we will look at other organs in experiment 4, but fat, subcutaneous fat, is what it will have the longest life in. Experiment 4, now that's the one I'm managing at DPIRD. So we're going to look at 3 different times of exposure to hemp. So 3 groups of sheep. One of the groups will eat the hemp diet for 7 days, 1 for 14 days, and the 3rd group for 30 days. These time periods, we believe, will reflect the amount of time they would spend grazing it in the field. And then we will be slaughtering 5 sheep at a time at different time points. So from time 0 up to probably 3 to 4 months after exposure. These time points will be based on the fat biopsies we get from experiment 3. We want to create regression equations describing the clearance of cannabinoids from subcutaneous fat, but also from brain, from kidney, from liver, and from meat, from the loin. All right, so these regression equations will be highly valuable moving forward and help us to develop those industry codes of practices. We're not going to get all the answers we need from this phase of the project. There will be more questions that need to be answered, but we will strongly advance our understanding in this field. I'm going to open the floor. This is the fun part, and I'm glad I have a very strong team around me to help answer all your questions. I know the chat's been going a bit crazy. So where to start is my question. I think, Gay, can I get all the panelists to come off mute, please?
Bronwyn, I've been trying to answer chats. I've been actually answering them.
Thanks. Excellent. Have there been any standout questions so far, Gay, that you would like to, that you think we could discuss?
There's been some actually really good questions in terms of interest in what we've seen with hemp seed. And I think it's really important to point out when we haven't done any research with hemp seed, and certainly the level of looking at residues and rumen parameters, even that hasn't been done with hemp seed. So we can't compare ours to anybody else's yet. So
I think also just looking through the questions, some of the information is embedded in the many of the early questions are then answered in the actual talks that were given later. And so it might be worth us making available the presentations to anybody who would like to have them. In this way, people can then just go through the presentations and have some of the early questions answered relatively straightforward. You know, there are small questions relating to the level of THC that occur early in the question time, which you know, are answered in, in Chris's presentation and elsewhere.
I'll make the presentations available to everybody. I'll email them round later today.
There's a question about heavy metals, and we are aware of under certain soil conditions that this may be an issue. It's not proven in any way yet, but it is something that I don't think that this will be an issue in relation to meat, but it's certainly something that has been considered in the seed that is being harvested for food purposes. And this I'm expecting to see this informed in the very near future.
Can I address a question from Davina? She says the regulations are really only concerned with THC and associated compounds. Perhaps less effort should be put into monitoring other cannabinoids. Correct, Davina, but with the tests that are run at Chem Centre, all cannabinoids are analysed in the single test. So we might as well look at all of them while we can, just to get that data for the future.
Certainly when we're thinking about things like appetite suppression or enhancement, these are not necessarily just related to THC. As pointed out in the human studies that Chris discussed, we have some appetite enhancing CBD cannabinoid products, and we have some appetite suppressing products. So cannabinoid materials. In the FSANZ standards, you know, cannabidiol is not allowed to be present in food at a level greater than 75 milligrams per kilo, right? So it's not in the regulations. It's not just all about THC, all right? There are some other cannabinoids that are addressed in the regulations as well.
It's also worth saying, Bronwyn, that some of the question I think went to all panelists only, and I think some of them went to all panelists and attendees. So I think perhaps not all of the attendees can actually see some of the questions earlier on, even if they were answered.
Okay, is there anything I can do to help with that now, or do I just need to monitor that and get back to people individually later on?
I guess if people are interested in answers that they don't have the questions to, then we might want to just repeat the questions. I don't know.
Bronwyn, we have a question relating to varieties used in phase 1 and 2. Can you?
Okay, yes, certainly. The varieties are Morpeth late. That the reason we chose Morpeth late, it's quite commonly available in Western Australia, but B, it does have a tendency towards slightly higher THC. So there's a lot of French varieties being grown in Western Australia, but these have been bred to have almost zero THC. And we wanted to start with a variety that was higher, so that we cover those types of varieties that are prominently in use in industry. So Morpeth tends, oh God, I've seen it at 0.5 or 0.6 THC. The crop we used was 0.35, if memory serves me correctly, or 0.33, something like that, percent.
And Bronwyn, just to clarify that, that's at the point of you know, the normal check that you make on the hemp crop. It's not the level that was in our stubble.
Correct. In our stubble, what was it? It was 0.001. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah, very low.
So the stubble that we used was the stubble from that variety, and is what we would consider a normal level in stubble for that variety. So it is based on current industry practice, current industry use at that level of maturity of plant. Beth, what varieties did you use?
So for the data that I showed earlier, that's my honours student work. I'm using CFX1.
Is that an eco-fibre variety?
Yeah, either CFX1 or CFX2.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We have a question about what trait in hemp biomass contributes the most to digestibility. I don't think we can answer that yet, can we, Gay? We simply, simply not quite that far advanced yet.
It's just when you look at the lignin contents, comparing cereal straw and hemp stubble, and tannins, our results aren't actually logical. And all I can think is that we've really strongly encouraged cellulolytic bacteria in the rumen when you feed hemp. And some of our minor VFAs is suggesting that as well. And so I think the answer is going to come from the composition of the rumen microbial populations having an enhanced ability to digest fibre.
Okay, thanks, Gay. Another question, any plan to feed the hemp oil directly to the ruminant? You know what, there's so much we could do moving forward. We would love to investigate that using hemp oil and the hemp seed and hemp seed cake as well, particularly from a fatty acid perspective. Looking at the change to the fatty acid profile of meat could lead to a value-added product. So I would like that to happen. There is literature in this space already, and I think other institutes are looking at this. We've gone for the more challenging material here, which is the hemp plant. So I think that's going to keep us busy for a while. But you know, we are open to collaboration and sponsorship moving forward. So if anyone would like to investigate this and have the means to partner with us, we are all ears. So please contact me after this presentation or some stage in the future.
Chem Centre also has a long history of working with the animal industry on alternative protein sources for agriculture, feeds. Some work was done last year looking at protein isolates from seed cake material. And so we have some initial data in this space, but no animal feed experiments have been attempted.
Is there another question? Is there any chance that you will extend your research trials to monogastrics, chickens and pigs, for example? I don't know how they'd go with the fibrous component of the plant, but certainly the seed has been used in research for monogastrics and is a highly valuable supplement The hemp seed cake is quite similar in canola meal when it comes to nutritional value and animal performance. But with a superior omega-3 profile, it can lead to a healthier, in terms of human requirements, end product in terms of eggs and meat and milk. I think further research in Australia is warranted in that space for sure.
Certainly, when we look at the seed, the potential to have a a high protein outcome is there. A good fatty acid profile is there. When we look at the biomass, it's not until we get to the green feed, which is what is being considered in this next series of trials, that we see protein content at a significant level. In the stubble that we've analysed in trial 1, protein level is a lot lower than what we are considering in this next series of trials.
From Trevor, those levels quoted are the flowers ? Are you referring to the THC levels quoted from the diets, Trevor? I'm not sure. In that case, it's from some of that's the flower after the seed's been extracted, plus the stem. Perhaps you can clarify what you mean in the text section. I'll just move on to another question. How do you think uptake would be from green leafy plant? Would it be palatable? And also plant loss from grazing? I'll start off by answering that, and I'm sure Gay and Ken will have something to add. I pretended to be a sheep a few weeks ago, and went into my own paddock of hemp, which was at the 5-leaf stage, and ate a plant, and it was really tasty. Would go really well in a salad. I expected it maybe to have quite a strong bitterness like the older leaf material does, but at that young vegetative stage, it had very little bitterness. Now, I'm not a sheep, but I thought it tasted good, and I imagine sheep would like it too. The stem was also quite soft, and it was very, very moist. So we don't know yet. And look, we are putting this material into pellets that have grains as well, making it quite a yummy diet for the sheep. So one of the future parts of this project will be to look at grazing behavior and just putting sheep on the crop at different stages and seeing whether they are selective, whether they do eat it, yeah, how they go in the real grazing situation. Anyone want to add anything to that?
Bronwyn, what I can add is just anecdotally, when I've been on touring around the subcontinent, through Pakistan, India and Sri Lanka, hemp, and I don't know if it's hemp or cannabis, hemp grows wild in those environments. And when you go and sift through what they're feeding their green chop to their dairy cows and buffaloes, there's an awful lot of hemp in it. So I suspect and they readily eat it. So if it's any way related to what we're feeding, there doesn't appear anecdotally to be any issue. I'm not expecting any issues with palatability based on what I've seen elsewhere.
Yeah. I've heard anecdotal evidence. Sorry, Ken, I'll get to you next. I've heard anecdotal evidence that when sheep or cattle are put onto hemp stubbles, they're not always particularly interested. Often there is other green feed around, which they select. I think it's a matter of sometimes it's simply a bit woody, or they're not familiar with the material. It's quite new to them. But more studies in the area are warranted. Ken, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just in trial 1, we've gone for a trial design that is our intent was isoenergetic and isonitrogenous. It has resulted to be close to that, but not quite. And this is because there was significant experimentation in formulation of the feed pellets. So nobody had ever formulated a feed pellet with hemp previously. And Bronwyn and our feed formulators had a lot of fun with this, trying to put it together, which is a whole another story. So very good lessons out of trial 1. The purpose of being isonitrogenous and isoenergetic was to show up potentially any anti-nutritional characteristics that might be present in the stubble. This next series of trials has the potential also to deliver similar kind of information with green feed, which may potentially be higher in phenolic content and or potentially any other anti-nutritional components. And so we intend to be measuring these as we're going along. And certainly, you know, we imagine that we will be gaining quite a significant amount of data out of this next 3 trials.
Thank you. I think we've answered most of the questions. I'm just going to check the Q&A. Hemp seed has low THC. Okay, no, nothing significant there. One new message from Mohammed. Do you have collaboration with Cyro, as they recently got licensed to do R&D on cannabis products and therapeutics? We would like more collaboration with Silo, I suppose. Moving forward, we'd like to collaborate with everybody in this and have a lot more people working in this field. So something to investigate. Definitely. I'm going to pop up my email address in just a second. There you go. So if anyone wants to contact me directly and offer, and offer millions of dollars, we are welcome. We would love to work with you. Sorry. And if you do have any additional questions or you want to talk about it over the phone, I haven't put my number up there, but email me first and we can start a discussion in that space. All right, there's another question here. Will your trial design provide data that can be used to calibrate the in vitro estimation of diets that include hemp? Good question, John. Yeah, sure. That would, there's a lot of work involved behind that. Beth, your work would probably contribute towards that, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's important in those kind of in that kind of work to have a spectrum of different varieties grown in different locations, and so that's one of the real advantages of the projects being you know, linked to each other or friendly to each other, in that, you know, the varieties grown in WA and the conditions that they're grown in are so different to the conditions and varieties that are grown in Tasmania, and so we can really get a much more accurate sort of picture of nutritional composition of hemp at different times, because when you only use one variety in one kind of environment, then the nutritional value is it's only really a picture into that environment and that variety, whereas we can get a much more holistic picture of what the nutritional value is really like.
Yeah, you're right. It will be very challenging to get that sort of calibrated data at this point in time, because there is such a wide variety of varieties. And I think maybe down the track, once there's fewer varieties grown in Australia and they're more specialised and less variable, that can be something to push towards.
Bronwyn, one of the things that we can do, we could run our diets through in vitro digestibility here at CSU, and that will be an interesting exercise, because if you're doing some of the in vitro digestibilities, if you're using any that involve ruminal fluid, you're dealing with pretty much a standardised diet for the animals that are collecting that ruminal fluid. And if we're profoundly influencing the rumen microbial population when you feed hemp, well then that really could show up that in using current in vitro technologies or techniques is not appropriate, but we can actually test that here.
Okay, great. Maybe it's something that we can work towards with everyone doing studies in this area, is whatever feed type you're testing, besides doing the wet chemistry, run it through the NIRS scanner as well, so that we can start collecting data in that field. Okay.
Again, I'll reiterate that what Gay said is that the in vitro measurement is actually like a fermentation measurement, and it's constrained by what's present. You know, what Gay is trying to say is that this particular measurement, if there is an alteration in rumen microbiological profile, which is what we suspect from the VFAs, then this particular test may not be of such significant value. All right. There's a couple of other questions here. Green material has a high, yes, we're aware of Oregon State and Kansas State University work, and we have reached out and made contact. There's a comment about camels and various other animals. One of the things that we have learnt in this trial is the significance of dose and the volume of feed that any particular animal might consume. And so if you're talking about a camel versus a sheep versus a cow, the volume of material that is consumed in a sitting is going to be quite variable, and therefore the dose that an animal might be receiving in a single meal is going to be quite different. Safety in target animal species. We have gone initially in trial 1 with a stubble material, which has what we considered to be probably the most safe material that we could feed, and the experiments from the results from trial 1 indicate no negative impact on animals in any way, even from a behavioural, from a digestibility, from a performance perspective. We have a watch on liver. That's the only thing that we are going to be paying significant attention to. But so far, all is good.
Great. There is another question from Omid Ansari. By the end of this project, will you be able to set the limit for THC level at plant level to have a 0 detectable THC and other cannabinoids? Would one of my panelists like to answer that one?
We might be able to start moving towards that from the pharmacokinetics study, okay, but we won't have a definitive answer in any way. And as Ken pointed out, it's not just how much is in the plant, it's how much is consumed as well, and over what period. We're not talking about just like having a one-off meal. That's what's very challenging with this plant, is that if you've got chronic intake, even these really low intakes can just sit there accumulating in the body and end up with residue. So even if we go, what's the limit in the plant, it's not a simple, it's this, because it'll depend on intake.
And we will look into that a little bit in the next stage, looking at the effect of time consuming hemp on the total accumulation and then clearance of THC.
Significant effort going into monitoring of withholding periods in the next. So it's worth stating that in trial 1, slaughter occurred without any withholding period at all. So it was, maximum straight off the diet. This is the outcome. In the subsequent trials that we're going to do, there is a lot of effort being put into looking at how things might be affected by withholding periods.
Yep.
And there's a comment there about Switzerland banning it in the belief that it could get into dairy products. Well, that is valid because it's so attracted to fat. There's milk fat. So we don't know how strong the affinity is for milk fat, but because it has such a strong affinity for fat in any case, there is the potential if there's residues in meat, there would be residues in milk. So that's another arm of research that needs to be done.
And we have begun discussions with Western Dairy, who are interested in this subject. Maybe we will look into some milk studies in the future. We are also going to test cannabinoid excretion in wool lanolin in phase 2, just so we can see how much is being partitioned through the wool, if any.
You know, we are interacting with the camel industry here in WA as well around camel milk. So no doubt the concepts earlier on about, you know, how this might affect camels, etc., will pop up over time. The team is looking to form regulatory alliances, research alliances, and you know, for me, this is outcomes of first trials, and we're really looking forward to engaging in key areas with our audience who turned up today, and also with others who have reached out.
Yep, absolutely. So Josh, will you be looking to work with New South Wales State or research in other New South Wales with different varieties? Absolutely. I think the way this research is going, we'll probably have to make it more of a program with various projects underneath it. Lots to discuss moving forward. Josh, contact me directly, please, to discuss what you're thinking. But yeah, I think this research will evolve to a program. I'd like to think so anyway. We have one last comment from Karen. Are you or have you looked at the effect on lambs? In the experiment we just ran, and they were hoggets, I would like to investigate hemp as a green feed for joining ewes and pregnant ewes, for example, and see how much passes on to lambs and the rate of clearance. You know, we've only looked at one class of animal in this study, and we've got to investigate all these different classes of animals moving forward. You can see how much research is required. But yeah, that would definitely be something worth investigating. Gay or Ken, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, we've been conservative from a bioethics perspective. So we've started with our initial program being conservative bioethically relating to animals. So as the data accumulates, the risk is, you know, established that, the risk is lowered. Data is accumulating at a great rate, and we're moving forward well.
Okay. You know what? It's 1 o'clock over in Western Australia, which means that we've come to the end of our time. I would like to thank everybody for your interest today and your questions. Like I've said, please get in contact with myself or one of the team if you have any further questions, or would you like to be involved in this project in any way. Thank you very much again to AgriFutures for having the confidence to invest in this project and hopefully future phases of the project. And thank you to Charles Sturt Uni for all of your contribution and involvement, and to Chem Centre. It's been great working with these institutes and getting to know all of the professionals in this space. We look forward to touching base again with the results of phase 2, probably at this time next year. But we hope to keep communications going in the meantime. I will be sending an email to everyone who's registered asking if you would like to be part of our national stakeholder list. So yeah, please reply to that email that I send around. I'll include the presentation slides with that. Do any of my panelists have anything to add before we sign out?
Sorry, carry on.
Go Beth, go Beth.
I'd just like to say that, you know, our project's sort of running slightly concurrently, but started later than this project. And so we'll be presenting our results in sort of 6 to 8 months. And so keep your ears out if you'd like to come and listen to what we found from our experiments, which I think are really synergistic with the stuff that you've seen today.
Thanks, Beth. Ken, did you want to say something?
Yeah, look, there is an intent over the next year to be forming sort of some big reference groups that include the regulatory aspects of this. So I'm aware within the audience that we have TGA and FSANS representatives in the audience. The group will be reaching out through the Department of Health in Western Australia, and I'm hopeful that we can get representatives from those groups interacting with us consistently across the year. Similarly, the other research efforts that are going on elsewhere in the state, it's always an open door here, and we will help as much as we possibly can.
Thanks, Ken.
And if I could just add, not only is this just a fantastic crop to be looking at, but it's an exciting crop. And if you think about through our presentation today, we've now got honours students across 3 states in Australia have been part of this, have been or will be part of this research, these research projects. And so hemp's opening the door for a whole new generation of researchers in Australia, which is really exciting in its own right.
Correct. Yes, good point, Gay. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. We will sign out.
Thanks, Bronwyn.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks from me too, Bronwyn. That was fabulous.
Excellent. Thanks. I'm going to stop recording.